when people are feeling that maybe the refugees or immigrants should not be entering our country, it's because they haven't seen. They haven't really gotten up and close enough to see what I see.
Welcome to Religion Unmuted, where we explore what religion sounds like with women's voices turned up. I'm your host, Pamela Prickett, a sociologist at the University of Amsterdam. Today, I'm honored to share my recent conversation about immigration and religion with the one and only Sister Norma Pimentel. Sister Norma is the executive director of Catholic Charities of the Rio Grande Valley, near the Texas border. Since joining the Missionaries of Jesus as a young woman, Sister Norma has dedicated her life's work to helping migrants. She's earned several awards as well as the respect of leaders across the political spectrum. She was one of Time's most influential people of 2020, and before that was coined the Pope's favorite nun after some much publicized praise from Pope Francis. Sister Norma, it is such a pleasure to have you on Religion Unmuted. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for inviting me to speak.
So I've read several news stories about you, and almost all of them recount the story of how you became a sister. It involves being both a woman and, if I'm remembering correctly, wanting free pizza. And so I wondered if we could just start with you telling us and our listeners that story in your own words.
Definitely, yes. I happen to be wanting to go to school in Austin for architectural design. My dad was kind of like not sure, giving me permission to do that. And so I got tired of just staying home and not doing anything. So I called this friend of mine and I asked her, "What are you doing tonight, Linda?" And she said, "I'm going to a prayer group." And I said, "What are you doing after the prayer group?" And she said, "We're going to Pizza Hut." And I said, "Fantastic. Can you pick me up after the prayer group and can join you for pizza?" And she said, "No, Norma, you have to come to the prayer group because we can't go back for you and then go back to the Pizza Hut." So I said, "Okay, fine, Brig, I'll go with you." So that's how it happened. I ended up going to the prayer group, and at that prayer group, my whole life changed completely. Here I am thinking I'm going in one direction. God decided to direct me in a different direction by actually, for the very first time in my life, I think I truly experienced God's presence. And the thing that came up as a result of that is joining the religious life. Sisters were actually at the prayer group inviting me to a vocational retreat, and I went there. And as a result of that, I chose to enter the Missionaries of Jesus.
And what do you recall? What was it about that evening?
What happened at the prayer group was I was shocked because it was during the charismatic movement, and all the people were, of course, very applauding and sharing their testimonies about how God has changed them. And I was like, my God, I can't believe these people are sharing all those, just spilling out their guts about their life and everything about them. And then at the end of the prayer group, they asked if anybody would like to be prayed over. And they put the chairs in a circle, and they had everybody that wanted to be prayed over sit at the circle. And my friend Linda said, "Norma, why don't you sit at the circle?" She knew I was struggling with my dad and how difficult I had it, and so he said, "Why don't you sit at the circle?" And I said, "Sure. I have a headache I haven't been able to get rid of, and sure, why not?" And so I sat down, and all these ladies just put their hands over me and over everybody else that was sitting there at the table, at the circle, and they started praying for us. And I felt during that time they were praying for me a beautiful presence of, I cannot describe. I just know something came into me that made me feel different. And so I know my headache went away, and I felt something so beautiful that I felt I needed to continue to understand what happened. And so that's how it changed me.
So it was really this embodied spiritual experience for you in that setting.
I think it's an awakening. It's like, St. Paul, when he had scales fall off his eyes. I think that scales fell off my eyes is how I began to see life, and through a different perspective. I could call it a God perspective. Life became different, how I understood it, how I saw it, how I experienced it. And I thought I was a happy person. I think at that moment I started to truly experience what happiness was.
So it's an interesting transition for somebody who's having difficulty with her father, in part because she's trying to do things that are outside of the norm or the box that she's been allowed.
Mm.
To devote her life to the Catholic Church, which has been seen at times as, having certain dimensions that aren't always promoting women's empowerment and interests. So I'm wondering, how do we reconcile that in your story?
You have a very good point. I have never thought about that, but it's true, especially the religious life is sort of like enclosure to a certain way of how you need to be. You're not free to be yourself. And yet I saw it differently at the time. For me, it was a freeing experience. I saw moving in that direction as an opportunity to be Norma, to be able to further understand and love God in my life and understand what God is doing in my life. And so I think I entered religious life right at the point when things were changing almost completely for religious life. I think at that time, a lot of the religious orders were leaving the habit and just wearing secular clothing and things like that. So I didn't see the old way of being 100% of religious life. So it was a transitional state, and I was beginning part of that. And so I think that gave me the opportunity to truly be myself in a religious organization that was trying to redefine themselves as well.
Maybe you can tell our listeners, especially younger ones, what is religious life? What does it involve? What kind of sacrifices have you had to make?
Well, I think you have to learn how to let go of everything so that you can be able to have everything. It's an openness to allow God to center your life around God's presence in your life, how to discover God through prayer, through service, through community life, and at the same time, discover yourself as a person of God. And so I think that religious life is an opportunity to consecrate yourself 100% to God. And to do so, you try to live your life in every aspect that you can. They guide you, they help you to discover how to commit yourself to work with others, to pray with others, to serve with others, and to live in community with others. And so it's a journey. It's a beautiful journey. It's what I have experienced religious life to be.
I love what you're saying because it really contradicts what I think is this dominant narrative when we think about religion and gender, or women in religion in particular. It's not because of restrictions or in spite of restrictions and rules that you have to follow, but it's participating in this life that seems to be freeing you and giving you the sense of a fully lived life. Am I correct?
Totally. You're right. And so I think that sometimes we allow ourselves to be, I think the mentors I've had in my life were very helpful to respect me as a person. My mentor was Sister Juliana, who was the head of the religious community of the Missionaries of Jesus. Juliana Garcia was a woman that was so committed to the church and to Jesus Christ. And she lived it out in every way she was. She was a beautiful person, a strong woman, a woman highly respected and cared by so many. And she always respected me for who I was and never forced me to try to be anything just because that's the way I needed to be. She allowed me to open up and blossom as a person. And so I think it's so important that as leaders of the church, we respect others in their journey to discover God in them, and so that they can fully come to be that person, very sure of themselves, because the more sure you are of who you are, the more God is present in you.
And the mentors that you mentioned, is this all taking place in the same general area at the border between Texas and Mexico? Is that where you've spent the bulk of your time?
Yes. Definitely, always. I have always been here at the border and have only left for studies and come back to the Rio Grande Valley. Yes.
And how do you think that area has shaped who you are?
Well, the border has definitely been a strong contributor to who I am because living at the border, I have completely identified myself with the people at the border, the families, the struggles, and the reality that we live at the border with the immigrants and refugees and families from Mexico struggling, and those in the U.S. that who are also struggling and trying to be a community, be a family. And so their struggles, their needs, their happiness, and their joys are part of who I am. And so it has defined me, and I have embraced that as part of me. And so I always say they are mi gente, my people, because we are one family. And I see that the Valley has become that for me.
I've heard you describe yourself as a product of the American dream. And I want to talk about that. What the American dream meant to you and what it still means to you. Can you tell me a little bit about being a little girl and what it was like to grow up at the border?
Yes. I do say that I am a product of the American dream. Was my father's American dream, that he was a young father, very committed to his family and struggling to get his family ahead and take care of them. And so he always looked toward the United States as a dream where he could help his family grow up and provide for them. And so he came to the United States when I was still in my mother's womb, and just simply to ask, what do I need to do to live in this country? And they told him, fill this application out. And so he did. And he said, okay, well, I'll go ahead and go back to Mexico and let me know when I need to come back, when you have a response. And he said, no, you can't go. You have to stay in the U.S. until we give you the response. And so he figured out how, went and found a job at a local supermarket, sacking groceries. And with that, he was able to take care of his family and wait for the response. And sure enough, I was born soon after that. And so that's why I always say I was born in this country by chiripa, which means by chance, because otherwise I would have been born in Mexico. That American dream of my dad is why I'm here in the United States and why I ended up growing up here and being who I am today. And so I saw myself always as a child going and coming back and forth. I didn't see a border. I always saw a bridge. Actually, grew up a lot in Mexico, celebrating life over there, going to church and to different events and posadas and things like that, and celebrations of Our Lady of Guadalupe. But then also the life that we led here in the United States, going to school and just being part of this country. And so learning to be part of both was part of what I became. A very strong part of me is from Mexico and also from the United States. So it's who I am today.
I'm imagining it's quite different now at the border.
Very different, yes. Unfortunately, with all the different things that we have encountered because of the political reality that we live today, where the border now is difficult to just cross back and forth. It takes a long time to come back if you go across, and there are long lines, and there's the border wall, and all of these things. Before, we would celebrate together as two nations on several events. Now, that is not something that happens.
I wondered if you can tell how people are being policed at the border, just to give our listeners a sense of the everyday.
Yes. Well, now because of the fact that there are so many families and children that are trying to enter the United States because they fear for their lives and they flee from their homes because of the circumstances they are having to endure there of corruption and abuse from gangs and cartels. And it's so dangerous. And so many of them are waiting at the border in those camps, refugee camps, right by the river, and hopeful that at some point they can cross, and sometimes waiting for already way over a year, almost 2 years. And so we see so many families that are desperate and end up crossing the river because waiting is just so long and it's almost impossible. And they don't find when this is ever going to be able to be possible. And so they end up risking their lives and daring to cross the river. And sometimes the mom is pregnant and about to deliver the baby. And so you see the fear of people and the families, and we hear somebody not making it and maybe finding their body later on by the banks of the river. And stories like this we hear almost daily of atrocities happening at the border because of abuse of some gangs, or because they were drowned at the river, or they were able to cross over and they're trying to see if somebody can identify them and know where they are. And this is stories that I hear daily of families worrying and suffering because they don't know if they will be sent back to Mexico or they're allowed to continue in the United States. And so this is ongoing almost every day.
And so that touches on another area I wanted to ask you about, and that is, how is the experience of migration and crossing the border in particular different for women than it is for men?
Well, women are more in danger, most because they are women and they can easily be abused by men, especially traffickers. They do abuse them and rape them and take advantage of them, and even the children as well. And so they're exposed to greater danger because of that. Like yesterday, we have a young girl, just 18 years old, and she's at a respite center in McAllen. She was sent there to us by Border Patrol. She's pregnant. She's about to deliver a baby. She has 2 kids of her own already, and she's 18. And one is about almost 3.5, and the other one is 2 years old. And the first baby, she's a product of being raped. And so this is the life that she has. And the man she's with, which is the father of the baby she's pregnant from, is 40 years old. And we said, why? Why are you with him? And she says, because he takes care of me. And so it's unfortunate that women are not better protected by society and yet are exposed to so much danger and continue to be so because we don't have a way to protect them and to keep them safe.
And how do we change that? If somebody's listening and they feel affected by that story, what do they do next? What do you recommend?
I think that it starts by taking responsibility to make our society a society that cares, that a society that is open to be present and to respond to when we see, and we can offer ways of making sure that life is respected, especially women's life should be respected always. And so making sure that we live that out in our own families, in our own community, and also encourage others to do so by example. And so it starts with that, and taking interest in wanting to be able to be a solution and not just listen to it as another story that I just heard, but find ways to find solutions to provide for this family. Like for this young girl, I said, we need to offer her other options so that she has not only that option to choose from, but that she may be able to go somewhere else, and that there is another community in the United States, since she's here already, that will welcome her and provide her with the care and attention that she needs as a young girl mother so that she can make her own choices.
You know, there's also a lot of Americans who don't want to get involved, or a lot of Americans who don't think that anybody should be allowed to cross the border and come into the country. And so I'm wondering, how do you address them? What do you say to somebody who says that 18-year-old girl shouldn't be allowed in this country?
I say what I would say to anybody else. is you need to see what I see so that you can feel what I feel when I see human suffering, and you will act like I do. We used to have a shelter for refugees in the 80s. And I remember actually one time I called a business to buy a Xerox machine. And I share this story a lot because it's very significant about what happened to people who are completely against helping illegal aliens, as they say. And this lady comes over to our shelter and she says, "Sister, I'm 100% against what you're doing here, helping these illegal aliens. But I'm a businesswoman, so I'm going to sell you my Xerox machine." And I said, "Thank you for letting me know. Let me show you what I do and why." And so I walked her through our house in the shelter, and I introduced her and showed her the families and the children and explained what was happening. When we got back to our office, she turns around and tells me, "Sister, I am 100% in favor of what you're doing." She said, I can't believe that you're here. You're an amazing salesperson. You convinced me 100%, and she says, "You're wasting your talent here. You could be making millions somewhere else." And I said, "Well, I'm here because this is where God has me, using my talents in the right place." And so anyway, that evening I got a call from her husband, and she said, "I don't know what you did to my wife today, but she came home and she said, if Sister Norma ever calls you, you make sure you do whatever she says," Anyway, that goes to show you that when people are feeling that maybe the refugees or immigrants should not be entering our country, it's because they haven't seen. They haven't really gotten up and close enough to see what I see and understand that they're a human being. They are a child of God and they need your help. And so I invite people who feel this way to come up close, to allow yourself to see. Because when you see, if you have God in you, I'm certain that you will feel what I feel, and you will do as I do too, because it is God with us that is helping us to reach out and welcome and care for that human person who is suffering.
I also want to be really conscious that we capture in our conversation a really accurate portrait of what's happening at the border. And I have to imagine that there's also laughter and children playing and happiness and joy. And so I wondered if maybe there's a story you could share with me that captures the happiness and the joy.
Oh, that's actually what I personally gravitate to, is when I go to the camp of the refugees in Matamoros, is being with the children. I love kids. And there's several that just catch my heart. Enjoy their presence, and as soon as they see me walking into the camp, they run with their hands open and says, "Madrecita," they're so happy to see me, mostly because I take chocolates, So, but anyway, we have a good time together. And I remember just recently, I took some volunteers over to the camp and some doctors, and we started to play soccer. And I said, "I'll join you," and so here I am playing soccer with all the kids, and we just had a lot of fun, just spending time together, laughing. And at the end of the time, they said, "Are we going to do this tomorrow?" I say, "Yes, we'll do this tomorrow." So it's always that moment that we capture of happiness and joy. And it's just so wonderful. And we just say, we have to do it again. Can we do this tomorrow again? And yes, my hope is to always do that tomorrow for the children, because that brings me happiness all the time. When I'm able to share time with them and laugh and just be a kid, it's beautiful.
Oh, I love that. Thank you. Well, it's obvious that you're exceptionally busy, and you could probably stay busy from this, all hours of the day and night. I'm wondering what you think about, what Sister Norma thinks about in quiet moments.
Quiet moments, I say, God, give me more energy. I think that my quiet moments are definitely important to find time, quiet time with God. Those are key to allow me to be able to center myself in that presence that will re-energize me, because it always has to be about God, because otherwise I think I will get in the way. So I want to make sure that I can find that inner strength that I need. It can only come from Him. And so aside from the fact that I enjoy art and painting and things like that, in order to do that, I need to also find a sense of quiet in myself. Otherwise, I can't paint. There's too much noise in me that I won't be able to do any painting. And
What was the last thing you painted?
the last thing I painted it's been so long. I haven't been able to paint probably in the whole pandemic, so it's almost a year. Or I have this hunger to be able to sit down and be able to do that, and I haven't been able to do much painting. I believe I like birds, and so I painted a hummingbird.
So your answer to that question makes me think you're feeling the way a lot of women are feeling since the pandemic began, which is there's never a second to catch your breath. That it is never ending. Well, I want to be really conscious of your time. And so when we wrap up now, I just wondered, is there anything else you'd like to say, or something that you think the public has really missed in discussions about immigration?
Well, I just wish people give themselves a chance to get close to an immigrant refugee and recognize that they are a human being, a person, just like you and me, and that they're hurting. Their stories are very sad and sometimes heartbreaking tremendously. Recognize that it is God asking you to get close and to care, because this is how God becomes present to us in these moments.
That's beautiful. Thank you. Well, thank you so much for joining us on Religion Unmuted. It has been such a pleasure and a real honor for me to be able to speak with you today. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you, everybody.
That's it for this episode of Religion Unmuted. If you enjoyed today's episode, make sure to subscribe to, rate, and review us wherever you listen. The Religion and Public Life program is on Twitter at RiceRPLP. Thank you again to our guest, Sister Norma Pimentel. Today's show was written by Haley Hemstreet, Rachel Schneider, and myself. Our producers are Three Wire Creative and Daisha Clay. We had support from the Henry Luce Foundation. I'm Pamela Prickett. Until next time.